This is the IELTS listening test, created and published by IELTSonlinetests.com 2025. You will hear a number of different recordings, and you have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. At the end of the test, you will be given 2 minutes to check your answer. Now turn to Part 1.
Part 1, you will hear John and Angela discussing the children's school options. First, you will have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
Come in, John. It's good to see you.
Thanks, Angela. I've been looking forward to this. I've been thinking about our conversation last week about the children and their schooling, and I want to know what you think about the options.
Well, there are a lot of things to consider. The first thing is that the choice of school depends on what you want for your children. So, why don't you tell me what you're thinking?
Well, I'm thinking about sending my daughter to a private school. I've read that they have better facilities, and the quality of the teaching is supposed to be good too.
Yes, that's true. But there are other things to consider as well. For example, the curriculum in private schools is quite different from the curriculum in public schools.
What do you mean?
Well, private schools tend to focus more on subjects like maths and science, and they also offer a lot of extracurricular activities, like music and drama. Public schools, on the other hand, offer a more balanced curriculum, with a wider range of subjects.
I see. That's something to think about. What about the cost? I've heard that private schools can be quite expensive.
Yes, that's true. Private schools can be very expensive, but there are some that offer scholarships or financial aid. It's worth looking into.
OK, I'll do that. What about class sizes? I've heard that private schools have smaller class sizes.
Yes, that's generally true. Private schools tend to have smaller class sizes, which means that students get more individual attention from teachers. Public schools, on the other hand, tend to have larger class sizes, but they also have more resources and support for students who need it.
That's good to know. What about the teachers? Are they better in private schools?
Not necessarily. There are good teachers in both private and public schools. It really depends on the individual school and the teachers themselves.
OK, that makes sense. What about the social aspect? I've heard that private schools can be quite competitive.
Yes, that's true. Private schools can be quite competitive, but they also offer a lot of opportunities for students to get involved in extracurricular activities and make friends. Public schools, on the other hand, tend to be more diverse, with students from a wide range of backgrounds.
That's something to think about.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you'll have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
What about the location? Is it better to send my daughter to a school that's close to home?
Yes, that's definitely something to consider. It's important for your daughter to be able to get to and from school easily, And it's also important for you to be able to get to the school if you need to.
OK, I'll keep that in mind. What about the reputation of the school? Is that important?
Yes, that's definitely something to consider. It's important to choose a school that has a good reputation, both academically and socially.
OK, I'll do some research on that. What about the size of the school? Is it better to send my daughter to a small school or a large school?
That really depends on your daughter and what she's comfortable with. Some children do better in small schools where they can get more individual attention, while others do better in large schools where there are more opportunities for socializing and extracurricular activities.
OK, that's good to know. Thanks for your help, Angela. You've given me a lot to think about.
You're welcome, John. I'm glad I could help. Good luck with your decision.
That is the end of part 1. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to part 1. Part 2. You will hear a woman giving a talk about the impact of climate change on agriculture. First, you will have some time to look at questions 11 to 13. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 13.
Today, I'm going to talk about the impacts of climate change on the agricultural sector over the next 30 years. In the last few years, there have been many reports on climate change and how it might affect our lives. But most of them are about the impacts on the natural environment. For example, how the rise in sea levels will affect low-lying coastal areas, or how rising temperatures will affect plant and animal species. And although these issues are important, I'm going to look at what's happening to food production. Now, the climate in the UK is generally mild and temperate, and this has affected the types of crops grown. For example, wheat is the main arable crop, and there are also large numbers of livestock farms. But this is changing. The UK is experiencing a warming trend, with average temperatures increasing by 0.8 degrees Celsius since 1980. And this trend is expected to continue with a predicted rise of between 1.1 and 5.8 degrees Celsius by 2050. This might not sound like very much, but it can have a significant effect on food production. For example, farmers are now able to grow crops that used to be grown further south. So there are now commercial vineyards in the south of England, and some of these produce very good quality wines. And this trend is likely to continue.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you'll have some time to look at questions 14 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 14 to 20.
But climate change isn't just about temperature. Rainfall patterns are also changing. The UK is already experiencing wetter winters and drier summers, and this is expected to continue. This can cause problems for farmers. For example, some areas have experienced summer droughts, and this has affected the yield of crops like wheat and barley. This is a particular problem for farmers who grow crops on light, sandy soils, which don't retain moisture very well. But it's not all bad news. Farmers can now grow crops like sunflowers and soya beans, which were previously unsuitable for the British climate. And the growing season is longer, so farmers can grow more food crops, which means they can make more money. However, there are some problems that farmers can't do much about. For example, the increase in rainfall has led to a rise in the number of floods, and this has affected food production. In fact, flooding is now one of the biggest risks to farming in the UK. Now, the amount of water that farmers use is also changing. In the past, water was used mainly for livestock, but now it's used more for irrigating crops. And this is putting pressure on water resources. In fact, the amount of water used for irrigation has increased by 90% since 1990, and this is expected to continue as the climate gets warmer and drier. So, what can farmers do to adapt to these changes? Well, there are a number of things they can do. For example, they can plant different crops that are more suited to the changing climate, or they can change the way they manage their land. They can also use different types of technology, such as precision farming, which can help them to use water more efficiently. But these changes can be expensive, and not all farmers can afford to make them. So, it's important that the government provides support for farmers to help them adapt to climate change. Now, one of the most important things that farmers can do is to improve the quality of their soil. Healthy soil is essential for growing crops, and it can also help to reduce the impacts of climate change. For example, healthy soil can retain more water, which can help to reduce the risk of droughts. It can also help to reduce the risk of floods, as it can absorb more water when it rains. So, how can farmers improve the quality of their soil? Well, there are a number of things they can do. For example, they can reduce the amount of ploughing they do, as this can help to reduce soil erosion. They can also plant cover crops, which can help to improve soil structure and fertility. But improving soil quality is not just the responsibility of farmers. It's also important for policymakers to recognise the importance of soil health and to provide support for farmers to help them improve the quality of their soil. So, in conclusion, climate change is having a significant impact on agriculture in the UK, and this is likely to continue in the future. It's important for farmers to adapt to these changes, and there are a number of things they can do to help them do this. But it's also important for policymakers to provide support for farmers to help them adapt to climate change and to improve the quality of their soil.
That is the end of part 2. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to part 2. Part 3, you will hear two students, Jack and Emma, discussing their presentation on a new type of artificial intelligence. First, you will have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
So, Jack, shall we go through the possible topics for our presentation on science and technology and see what we think?
Yeah, we've got to choose something the whole class is interested in, so that's a few people. What did you think of artificial intelligence?
I think it's pretty difficult to make it interesting.
I'd have thought the class would find the topic on robots interesting. I think it would be hard to get enough information together in the time available.
I agree. What about cloning?
I think it would be hard to make a well-organised presentation. We'd have a lot of material, but we'd have to plan it very carefully.
Yes, that's true. It wouldn't be easy to keep the class focused on what we were saying. What about genetics then?
I think the class would find it a bit boring. I think we'd find it quite difficult to understand too.
Why don't we choose a new type of artificial intelligence? I think it would be really interesting.
Yes, I'd be interested in that too. It would be easy to organise the presentation, and I think the class would find it interesting too.
Okay, let's do that then. I think we should also end with the ethical issues.
Right. Let's make a list of the topics we need to cover.
Okay. Well, I suppose we better start with the definition and a bit of history. I can do that.
Okay. Then we need to talk about how it works, and I'm not sure how to explain that. Do you want me to do it?
No, I'll do it. That's fine. Then you can talk about the benefits of this new type of AI.
Okay, I can do that.
Do you want to talk about ethical issues?
I'm not sure. I think it's going to be quite difficult.
I'll do it then. I think it will be easier for me to understand than the benefits.
Okay, thanks.
Right, I'm off to the library. I want to get some books on this new type of AI.
I don't think we need to get any books. I'm sure we'll be able to get all the information we need from the internet.
I don't think that's a good idea. I think it would be better to use books.
I don't agree. I think the information in books will be out of date, and I think it will take longer to find the information we need.
I suppose you're right. We can always get some books later if we need to.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you'll have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
How should we structure our presentation?
I was thinking we could do a formal talk, but then I realised it might be a bit dull. Instead, we could make it more engaging by having a conversation between the two of us.
Oh, that's a good idea. It'll feel less like a lecture and more like a discussion. What about visuals? Should we use slides or something else?
Absolutely. Slides will help, but I think including charts would work best for explaining trends or comparisons. Tables are useful too, but they can sometimes be too detailed.
Got it. We can finalise which visuals to include later. So, what's your plan for the preparation?
Well, I'll start by looking into the history of AI. There's a lot of information out there, so I'll probably stick to a few reliable websites. I might check some documentaries too, but only if I have extra time.
Sounds good. I'll focus on the potential benefits of AI. There's so much to cover. Healthcare, education, automation. I'll try to narrow it down to the most significant ones.
Great. If I hit any roadblocks, I'll contact my tutor. She's really helpful when it comes to clarifying things.
That's a smart move. Oh, and what's our deadline? Is it still the end of the month?
No, it's sooner than that. We need to have everything done by the end of the week.
Right, I'll make sure we stick to that. Let's get started.
That is the end of part 3. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to part 3.
Part 4.
You will hear a man giving a talk about problems in the workplace, and some solutions. First, you will have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
In this lecture, I'm going to continue our work on management in the workplace by looking at what can go wrong when a team tries to deal with a problem at work. I'm going to give you some examples of different problems, and at the end, I'd like you to think of some problems you've experienced yourselves in the workplace, and we can discuss them. Okay, so here's a common problem that can arise. Individual team members don't accept that they're responsible for problems that arise. They say things like, "Oh, it wasn't me who made that mistake," or "Nothing to do with me, I'm afraid." So why is it that some people avoid taking responsibility for their mistakes? Often it's because they're afraid. They fear losing their job, or getting a reprimand from their boss, or even being demoted. These are all common fears, and they can have a negative effect on the whole team. Another problem is when people just don't get on with each other. People have very different personalities, and for some reason they just can't work together. This may be because their ideas about what's important at work are different. Maybe they have different attitudes towards how to do a job, or how to spend their time, or how to prioritize tasks, or maybe they just don't like each other. When this happens, it's important to find a way to overcome the problem before it affects the whole team. Another problem is when team members don't share information with each other. This can result in a situation where one person is doing a task without realizing that someone else is doing the same thing. This is a waste of time and effort. It can also result in mistakes being made, and this can lead to resentment and conflict within the team. It's important to have clear communication channels in place so that everyone knows what's going on and what their role is. Okay, so what can we do to avoid these problems? Well, the first thing is to make sure that everyone understands their role and responsibilities within the team. This means having clear job descriptions and making sure that everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing. It also means having regular meetings where everyone can discuss any problems or issues they're having. Another important thing is to make sure that everyone feels like they're part of the team. It also means making everyone feel valued and appreciated. This means recognizing people's achievements and contributions, and making sure it also means dealing with any conflicts or issues that arise quickly and fairly. Finally, it's important to have a positive team culture. This means creating an environment where people feel comfortable sharing their ideas and opinions, and where everyone is encouraged to contribute. It also means having a sense of purpose and direction so that everyone knows what they're working towards and shares a common goal for success. Okay, so that's a brief overview of some of the problems that can arise in a team and some of the ways to avoid them. Now I'd like you to think about a problem you've experienced in the workplace, and we can discuss it. So, who would like to go first? Yes, John.
That is the end of part 4. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to part 4.
That's the end of the listening test. You will now have 2 minutes to check your answers.